I think a lot of people get intimidated by sourdough because I think it seems complicated, or they start and they think they've messed up somehow, so they throw it out and they give up. I'm going to show you how to do it. You're going to need some whole wheat flour, all-purpose flour, some water, a jar, a cloth, and an elastic band, or you can use a paper coffee filter or something, and a kitchen scale if you have one. Don't run out and buy one if you don't have one. You can do measurements by volume. This is just a slightly more accurate way to do it, and it'll make making bread later a little easier. So I do recommend grabbing one if you can, but if you can't, just use volume. 100 grams of water, 100 grams of the whole wheat flour. If you don't have a scale, put in 1 cup of the flour and half a cup of water. And then mix. Cover with a cloth and secure it with an elastic band. So we're gonna let this sit for 24 hours and then we'll give it a feeding. It's day 2 of making a sourdough starter. It's time for feeding. We're going to use basically the same stuff, but today we're using the all-purpose flour instead of whole wheat. This is what our starter looks like after about 24 hours. And I just want to show you what the more mature starter looks like for a point of comparison. It's got lots of nice bubbles in there, and it's a lot more gloopy, for lack of a better word. We're going to discard about half of our starter from yesterday. Okay, and then we're going to feed it. Just like yesterday, we're going to do 100 grams of water and 100 grams of all-purpose flour. And then scoop down the sides and stir. And again, to compare, I'm going to discard from the more experienced starter and give that one a feeding too. You can see it's a lot more loose than the new one. Big difference. So we've got new starter and experienced starter both fed, and we'll leave them for another 24 hours. Don't forget to cover them first, of course. It's day 3. We're making a sourdough starter. Not much different than yesterday. This is what our starter looks like on day 3. Today I want you to discard closer to 2/3 of the starter. And just like yesterday, we're going to add 100 grams of water and 100 grams of all-purpose flour, or half a cup of water and 1 cup of flour by volume. And today we're going to transfer it to a larger, slightly larger jar. Then we're going to cover and leave it for another 24 hours. Good morning. I will answer your question, but first, we've got bubbles. So now is a good time to start thinking about names for your starter. It's day 4 of making a sourdough starter. And by the way, I'm Heather. I help people stretch their budgets and make tasty food with tips and tools that save them time and money. It hasn't quite been 24 hours yet, but around that time, I want you to do another feeding. So you're going to discard about 2/3 of your starter, and then you're going to feed it 100 grams of water and 100 grams of all-purpose flour. Or if you're doing measurements by volume, you're going to do half a cup of water and 1 cup of all-purpose flour. And to answer your question, can you split this with a friend before it's fully mature? Yes, definitely. As long as you give your friend the same instructions so that they're letting the yeast develop and letting the starter mature before they try to use it. So make sure that they know what the volumes are or what the feeding measurements are. And then you both get to make bread. So that's great. We're still going to need a few more days of feeding and discarding and feeding and discarding before the starter's actually ready to start making bread. It's still going through the process of maturing. So keep being patient, stick with me, it's going to be worth it. It's day 5 of making a sourdough starter, and I think it might be ready to test by making a loaf of bread. I just want you to see a comparison. On this side, we have our new sourdough starter that we started 5 days ago, and this is a mature starter that I've had for a few years. You can see there is a considerable difference in the size of the bubbles in the fed starters. So this one is still maturing and still getting stronger, but we're gonna give it a try anyway. Moment of truth. This is the loaf that was made with the mature starter. It got a lot of oven spring, which is how much it rises when it's first in the oven. It's nice and light and airy. And I'm actually kind of glad this was a fail, because this is a good learning moment. This is where people give up, and I don't want you to give up. So this did not have much oven spring. It's pretty dense, actually. Let's cut them open. Big difference. This is a great, as we call this, the crumb. It's nice and lots of airy bubbles inside. The crust is nice, whereas this is mostly really dense with a few really giant cavernous bubbles inside. The starter wasn't ready, but that's okay. We're gonna keep feeding, we're gonna keep going, and it's gonna mature eventually. You'll get good bread eventually. I have an update. It's been about 1 more week of feeding our brand new starter, and the next loaf looked much better. Let's cut it open. Okay, moment of truth. Look at that crumb. That's so much better. All the bubbles are a lot more even. It didn't get quite as much oven spring or lift or like rise as I would like, but this is a huge improvement over the first test loaf. And I think this starter is good to go, ready to use. How is yours doing? Tell me in the comments.